Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody here this morning to the September 3rd, 10 a.m. Board of Supervisors meeting. And before we kick things off, we are pleased to welcome Pastor Jackson Moore from Stevensburg Baptist Church to lead us in our invocation. So if I could, I would ask those who are willing and able to stand for invocation and then for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me with you this morning. I consider it a great blessing to come to any government gathering, whether small or great, and bear witness to the gospel. That is something that the apostles would consider astonishing and a great work of God in their day, and I consider it the same today, so thank you very much. As I was considering this morning what to say and how to pray for you all, I was praying for you all by name this morning, and I wasn't sure exactly how to articulate in words. I turned to the Bible and read in 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul's instructions to Timothy. And he says, "First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good, and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. For there is one God, and there is one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all, which is the testimony given at the proper time." And I want to do just that this morning. As we pray together, I want to offer prayers in the name of Jesus Christ. And so let's pray together. Father, we do thank you for this opportunity to gather. Lord, I thank you for each member of the board who is here this morning. I thank you for all who have gathered. And Lord, I want to ask your blessing over this time here this morning. Your word has commanded us and called us to offer prayers for everyone. This is good and pleasing in your sight. And so, Lord, I ask that you'd bless this time, and I ask that you would bless these men and women as they serve and lead and do work and labor in this county. Lord, your word calls us to work with excellence and to follow in your commandments and your guidance. As Paul says in Romans 13, authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. But Father, we also confess that we all labor imperfectly. None of us is sufficient to work and to labor in and of ourselves. Left to our own, we fall short and we fail because we are all sinners. And ultimately, what you have called us to do in life, we fall short of. And who you call us to be in your sight, we cannot be. And what you call us to do, we cannot do because of sin that remains in us, that separates us from you. But Lord, we take heart in the words just read that there is a mediator, that there is a go-between between God and man, that the Lord Jesus Christ came and walked on this earth in our place as our substitute for our sins, that where we were imperfect, he was perfect, and that where we have failed, he has done all things well and excellently, and where we have sinned, he has been sinless. And Father, I believe that on the cross, he died for our sins, and according to the Scriptures, so that everyone who confesses with their mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord and believes in their heart that God raised him from the dead will be saved. And Lord, that is the hope and the reason that I can even pray to you here this morning. And I pray for these supervisors, these leaders in our community. I pray for Paul Bates, for David Durr, for Gary Deal, for Brad Rosenberger, for Susan Dugino, for David Lee, and for Tom Underwood. Father, I ask that you would bless them this morning, that you would empower them to serve and to lead in a way that is pleasing and honoring to you, that you would give them wisdom and unity and winsomeness and good discernment as they lead and they make decisions this morning. I've been thinking, Lord, this morning of Joseph and Daniel, the two great politicians of the Old Testament, and just thinking of their character and how they were great men of God before they were great men in the place of government. And it was their allegiance to you, their faith in you, their holiness that enabled them to lead well and to serve well and to govern well. So, Father, I pray that very same thing for these board members here this morning and for all who are serving in any capacity today, Lord. I ask that you would, by the power of your Holy Spirit, grant us to live well before you, to serve well. And we acknowledge that this can only come through the gospel of Jesus Christ, that based on our relationship with him by faith, you can and do enable us to do all things well. And I ask that very thing this morning in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. Thank you.
Now I call to order the September 3rd, 2024 annual supervisor. And I would ask that Supervisor Durham lead us, Supervisor Lee, I'm sorry, lead us in the pledge. All right. First order of business is we have an agenda before us. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda on under item number 9.0 to include an item 9.02 pursuant to the Virginia Code, Section 2.23711, A7 and A8. The board will consult with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters, in particular pending lawsuits.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing no other additions or deletions to the agenda, we will proceed forward as presented. Amended, I'm sorry, amended. Item 2.02 is our consent agenda, and I will ask our County Administrator, John Eggerston, to introduce these items.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the board. We have several items on consent this morning. Under item A, the board will consider approval of the minutes from the August 6th, 2024 AM meeting. Under item B, the board will consider approval of a reimbursement of permit fees paid by the Brandy Station Volunteer Fire Department in conjunction with their Fireman's Fair fundraising event. The amount eligible for reimbursement is $427.04. Under item C, the board will consider approval of a budget amendment in the amount of $6,000 for the Sheriff's Office. The funds are a donation from Back the Blue and will be for the cadet program. Under item D, the board will consider acceptance of a grant and approval of a budget amendment in the amount of $2,500 for the Sheriff's Office for funding received from the PATH Foundation for National Night Out. Under item E, the board will consider approval of a budget amendment in the amount of $34,207 for the Clerk of the Circuit Court for the technology trust funds received from the State Compensation Board. Under item F, the board will consider a budget amendment for the Department of Emergency Services in the amount of $6,000 from the sale of an out-of-service ambulance. The funds will be utilized to assist in funding compliance with the FDA Drug Supply Chain Security Act. Under item G, the board will consider budget amendments for funds received by the county through voluntary contributions for the Animal Services Department in the amount of $17,002.26, the library in the amount of $11,948.98, the Parks and Recreation Department in the amount of $4,881.24, and Culpeper Human Services in the amount of $16,067.47, and the Culpeper County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association in the amount of $23,989.28. And under item H, the board will consider a CIP project transfer for the school system in the amount of $258,534.50 for the FY25 budget.
Thank you, John. Any discussion or entertain a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Moving on to item 3.0, general county business. The board will consider adoption of a resolution recognizing September 17th, 2024 as Constitution Day in observance of the 237th anniversary of the signing of the United States Constitution. And with this, again, I'll turn it over to our county administrator for introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a resolution for consideration this morning that I will read into the record, and following that, should the board see fit to adopt it, we have Martha Menton with the Culpeper chapter of the DAR here to accept a copy of the resolution. This is a resolution proclaiming September 17th, 2024 as Constitution Day in observance of the 237th anniversary of the signing of the United States Constitution. Whereas September 17, 2024 marks the 237th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution, and whereas the United States Constitution, written in 1787 and ratified in 1788, and in operation since 1789, is the world's longest surviving written charter of government. And whereas its first three words, "We the people," affirm that the government of the United States exists to serve its citizens. And whereas Virginia's founding fathers were among the original framers of the United States Constitution, which included several notable Virginians. And whereas Virginia's own Declaration of Rights, authored by George Mason, was later used as a model for the first 10 adopted amendments to our nation's Constitution, becoming the Bill of Rights. And whereas more than 2 centuries after its ratification, the United States Constitution remains a vital and living document, strengthened by amendments, serving as both guide and protector of U.S. citizens and their elected officials. And whereas the history, significance, and effect of the provisions in the Constitution and its amendments are essential knowledge for all citizens, and whereas knowledge of the sacrifices made for freedom as well as the values on which this country was founded is an integral part of civics and government education, and whereas citizens of the Commonwealth are encouraged to reaffirm the ideals that the framers of the Constitution had in 1787 by vigilantly protecting our liberties and furthering the education of our citizens, and especially our young people, about the importance of the Constitution and the freedoms it guarantees. Now therefore be it resolved that the Culpeper County Board of Supervisors do hereby recognize September 17th, 2024 as Constitution Day in the County of Culpeper, Virginia, and calls this observance to the attention of our citizens.
Thank you, John. I guess we'll entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
I move that we adopt the resolution proclaiming September 17th, 2024 as Constitution Day.
Motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. And are we presenting that, Ms. Ellis, or?
If Ms. Minton is here, our deputy clerk has a copy signed and ready for you.
Celebrating the 17th to commemorate the signing with bells across America, which is where we ring bells at 4 o'clock to remember that they rang bells in Philadelphia to announce the signing and completion of the document. We invite everyone here on the board and our Culpeper community to join us. We will be at Main and Davis on the 17th at 4 o'clock, but you're welcome to bring your bell wherever you're at. We're hoping it sounds like Christmas in September. We have the schools are ringing bells as well as our churches in the Culpeper County. So thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right, Lisa.
Want to open the resolution?
I certainly can. Maybe. Thank you.
All right, moving on to old business, item 4.01. The Board of Supervisors will continue discussion regarding subdivision rules in the A1 agriculture and RA rural area zoning districts. And I would ask that our planning director, Sam McLaren, introduce this item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm going to grab that clicker real quick. Mr. Chairman, if you like, I'd like to just kind of, I'm not going to go through this whole PowerPoint presentation, but I'm just going to use it as a basis to get this conversation started with the board this morning. As you'll recall, the board sent the Planning Commission and staff to work on potential subdivision amendments in the A1 and RA districts in the county. The Planning Commission has since conducted 3 separate work sessions on the topic. And what I'm going to share this morning, and the board also kind of put a first time frame to have it back in September. It's September 3rd, so that's why we're here this morning. But I just wanted to kind of report on what the Planning Commission has sent up to the board for further discussion and consideration this morning. Just a reminder, we do have quite a bit of the A1 RA agricultural and rural area zoning districts throughout the county. Makes up the majority of the county still today. Current code allows for 3 acres, minimum with 200 feet of state road frontage in the RA, and 5 acres in the A1 with 250 feet of state road frontage. Both districts, if you don't have that road frontage, the minimum acreage today is 10 acres. One thing that the Planning Commission did in their discovery is they tasked staff to give them some facts and figures. We've tried to do that along the way to kind of help with their basis for decisions and recommendations. This is just a current acreage tabulation of acreage ranges in the A1 RA districts. Looking at a better of 6,443 parcels today, give or take, in the A1 and 5,324 parcels in the RA. So there's a lot existing parcels. The ranges up there kind of also indicate where the bulk of our parcels are today, which are 10 to a little less than 20 acres. That was significant for the Planning Commission when they were considering things. Population growth continues to increase steadily in the county. Why are we considering changes? This is something that I addressed with the Planning Commission, and this is the basis for any code change, at least from a zoning standpoint, should be rooted in the comprehensive plan first. The county did adopt a comprehensive plan in 2023. It did set some visions and goals as well, and there's different ways to achieve those, of course, but a lot of times you do want to consider your ordinances to see if they align with those visions and goals that you do have in the comp plan. One thing that we've used as examples just to kind of say, hey, what you can do today, and then is there a different way to do it? And staff, as well as the Planning Commission, have found examples to be helpful in thinking about these things. This is just an existing parcel. There's no specific reason why this parcel was chosen. It's just one that's been used as an example. It has a lot of road frontage. It's a 182-acre piece, so it's a significantly sized piece in the A1, but has a lot of road frontage as well. And typically that yields over time in Culpeper to date, quite a few lots. Someone bought that piece of property or had that piece of property and they desired to subdivide it. They're not, of course, they don't have to. If they desire to subdivide it, they could divide it into 3 tracts today if it hadn't been previously divided. And then in 5 years, they could divide each one of those 3 tracts into 3 tracts, yielding 9 lots. And then potentially at year 10, yield an additional 3 on each of those 3. So in this particular example, you could get 26 lots on this parcel. And there, today, our ordinance kind of forces, if you're going to subdivide and you're zoned A1 and you're trying to maximize your yield as far as subdivision potential, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to have 5-acre lots along the road, each at 250 feet minimum, what our code prescribes, and then 10 acres in the back. And you'd have several easements, some joint easements to service as driveways and to get back to these 10-acre parcels. Of course, this is considering good soils everywhere, right? No floodplain, those things as well. Just some more data that the Planning Commission, this just shows where we've seen construction, actual construction, not lot creation, but actual construction throughout the county. And this is maybe hard to see here, but it's just basically a chart to show where each home has been built by year. And you can see predominantly where we have existing lots in the western and northern part of the county is where you see it. And then another heavy spot along 610, the Stevensburg district. Just some comp plan slides that talk about different things you want to consider when you're talking about growth in general, and I won't focus on those this morning. These were the options that the Planning Commission did consider, among some other things as well. There was a good contingent of the Planning Commission that would prefer the board do nothing in the A1RA district, and that was stated again at the last work session. We did consider options to just increase the minimum lot size, which would reduce your residential density, in theory, across the county. And that could range anywhere from A1 to 20 acres, RA to 6, or anything there that the board desired. And that would reduce the density, obviously, in the county if you increased the minimum lot size. To decrease the density allowed, and then incentivize cluster options. Cluster option is something I'm going to get to here in a second that is recommended by the Planning Commission that the board further consider. Option 4, again, basically says, you decrease the density, initial density of what someone can do today, and then you can regain it back if you do a cluster style development. And again, that just kind of forces the issue as far as requiring cluster. And then option 5, requires cluster, that term requires probably should be reworded because it's caveated with an option that you would have an alternative option to do what you can do today. So there's a cluster model, and I'm going to present that next. But what the Planning Commission recommended the board is that, yeah, you can do a cluster option, but you can also do what you do today as far as 3-5 every 5 years. The option that the board is considered or is recommended to the board by the Planning Commission is to encourage or to allow a cluster option. As I mentioned today, right now you can only do the 3 and 5 10 acre if you're looking to subdivide your property. This would create a new subdivision potential or a way to subdivide the property, a new primary minor subdivision ordinance that requires 70% as open space or restricted, meaning that you can only develop 30% of the property. Coupled with that, 30% of the road frontage as well. The idea behind that is to create a subdivision that doesn't necessarily decrease density initially, but does create a different option for subdividing and potentially would allow a larger usable open space tract that could be farmed or used as open space in general. The road frontage criteria is a unique take as well, basically limiting the amount of road frontage that you can use in hopes that it would produce a rural look. Instead of stripping the road as you saw, for example, on Route 610 in the county that we've seen recently, it allows for a different type of subdivision where you're not using the road every 200 feet or every 250 feet with a house and driveway. Planning Commission also would encourage the board to look at private road standards. That was something that was talked about a few different times for certain size subdivisions, and staff would support that as well. And there are many what I would call plug-and-play options for that as far as basing it on VDOT standards and then having our own private road development standard that would be with the subdivision. This cluster option, if the board saw fit, would be a minimum. This is, again, can be further discussed, but the Planning Commission recommended a minimum lot size of 2 acres. One thing of note with this type of option, it is possible, potentially, we didn't study any specific examples, but you do have areas in the county where there's blackjack soils. So if you have the ability to cluster, there's a potential that that lot could yield potentially more lots than what our ordinance allows today. There again, that has not been studied, but there is that potential. So I just wanted to point that out. This is an example of That style cluster, again, this is not a survey document. This is just a concept. But these are 2-acre lots. In this example, you still allow the 26 lots that this parcel could yield today under our current ordinances over a 10-year period, but you're allowed to do them as a cluster option with one, in theory, private road, long cul-de-sac, and then these are 2-acre lots. You can see if you chose that model, you'd have a large open space tract potentially of 127.5 acres. Just a different way to be able to yield the same type of concept. If you broke it up into 2 different areas, maybe you had a good pocket of soil here if you're looking to develop, and maybe one here, but not all the way down, as the further example showed. And potentially could do something like this under that style. Thing to keep in mind, is it does allow for open space. It does allow for a larger spot. It does allow for a different style of development than what we see in the county today. And does, in this example, we would encourage the board to consider private road standards for these roads, as there'd be several lots on one driveway or one access point. This is just an example, and this is just, again, just a visual example. It's really all this is. This is something that you could do today versus these 2 examples under a cluster option. Again, these options that the Planning Commission has recommended do not decrease density. And, Mr. Chairman, that's one thing I did want to point out, that during the Planning Commission's discussion, they were pretty consistent. Overall, there were some Planning Commissioners that would be okay moving forward with reducing density, but by and large, the Planning Commission did not favor that option moving forward. Blackjack soils map may come into play if the board wants to further consider the cluster option, and something that we could develop as an overlay district and actually decrease the density in these areas if the board saw fit to do so. This is a map that we use today. We use it largely with construction. Building department uses it to make sure we get different design footings for these areas. One option that the Planning Commission, looked at is what you're seeing today, and there are other ways, to try to meet the goals that are in the comp plan for A1RA, rural preservation, making sure agricultural goals are met. This is not the only way. Subdivision ordinance is potentially one way, but there are other ways to do it, and those are things that would encourage the board to continue to consider as well. And then private road standards was something that we discussed as well. And this is just an example of what we could do and develop in our ordinance. And this is something that we do not have today. This would be new for Culpeper as well. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to pause there. Happy to take questions, but I want to make sure that the board understands what the Planning Commission is recommending at this time. But more importantly, I want to take direction from the board this morning on how to move forward. So.
Thank you, Sam. Questions or comments for Sam?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Is there any reason, if soil allows, that you couldn't go to an acre or acre and a half under a cluster instead of a 2-acre minimum?
No, I think you could. I mean, we have 1-acre lots today in the county that readily use, private well and drain fields. All these would be under a private well and drain field scenario, so you could go below 2 acres. So that was just the recommended starting point for this.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Could you do this and also perhaps add in the purchase of development right alternative? So have what you have here where you could do clustering, you could do what you could do now, but the county could also look and say, if you have those 26 lots, we could set a price of, hey, if you don't want to do those and just are looking for the money, if you do the deed restriction required on all of it, you can sell those 26 rights.
Sure, and we have that tool available. We worked on the purchase of developments right. I think we call it agricultural conservation ordinance or something to that degree. I can't remember right exactly. I apologize. But a purchase of developments rights program we do have, and we've actually worked on that ordinance recently. I believe it's in fairly good shape if the board wanted to move forward with something like that. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sam, when we talk about the private road requirements, is there Other than the initial build, what kind of safeguards can we put in place in an ordinance or somewhere that would ensure that maintenance is
Sure.
upkept?
It'd be similar to what we do today for stormwater, you know, and most of these are in subdivisions, you know, just using this as an example, you know, that have state roads. So if you have a private road, for example, there'd be a deed of subdivision or some type of document that would be set up in the beginning to show the road maintenance agreement, to show the share of what lot owner would have to pay. In other words, that mechanism, we're not going to get into the details of necessarily proving what that actually, the amount looks like, but to make sure there's a mechanism in play to each owner would have to be responsible to some degree. It still would be enforceable, in my mind, as a private road, meaning that the HOA or the lot owners themselves would have to regulate that. But we would have a standard to fall back on. In other words, that for that private road example, and this is just a cut sheet, but it just shows, you know, your base, your width, your cleared area, you know, some minimal drainage or cross slope. But those are minimum standards. Those would be checkable, you know, field checkable, at least initially, and could be followed up by staff if need to in the future. But most of the time, those are going to be enforced, you know, through an HOA or the lot owners themselves. So.
Okay, 'cause-
Sam, if those standards for roads are put in place, what would the process be to have that road taken over by VDOT?
One, it would need to be initially designed or thought to be a VDOT road because it would be different standards than what you see on the screen here to some degree. But it really would be through initially probably through the subdivision design phase like we do today for other major subdivisions.
And in your experience, would VDOT readily accept this type of road or not?
They would if it meets their standards and their secondary street acceptance requirements, SSAR requirements that VDOT's looking for to accept any street. But if they met those requirements, which means they have to have some type of connectivity requirement, and that's one that some development, if you were to do something like this, it may not be brought into the state system just because VDOT's looking for a connectivity inside the neighborhood. Now, if you were to connect these two roads here and divide off of it, that road probably would meet eligible requirements. But there again, VDOT does accept cul-de-sacs. We have them in major subdivisions, but typically they're of a smaller size or they have the ability to connect to something in the future. So that is a big requirement for VDOT. So.
Sam, just for comparison's sake, what do our neighboring counties have in place?
For road standards?
No, sir, for the A1 and RA.
That varies greatly, Supervisor Lee. I mean, Fauquier, for example, has a sliding scale model. That's what they use. So if you had a 20-acre lot, you may get 4 lots. If you have a 50-acre lot, you may get 8 lots. It just depends on your acreage and then how many lots. And there are some counties that have, like Rappahannock, that have a large minimum lot size, 25 acres, you know, and there were 25 acres, right. And that's something that we have not looked at here in Culpeper. And then there are other counties that do something similar to what we do. You know, you can divide over time. Madison still does that, so.
Sam, Madison just increased their time-based subdivision, right? Didn't that go to 10?
I think so, Supervisor Bates, Chairman Bates. I don't know for sure, though. I'd have to.
But to the answer to the question surrounding counties, and on example 4 showing 6 lots in Clark County where we've got 26, and
right.
Fauquier showing 10, Spotsylvania, I understand, they just changed their ordinance where they've, you know, trying to decrease the density. So that kind of puts a target on Culpeper, the way I look at it, that, well, the surrounding counties are more restrictive, so let's all, you know, head to Culpeper. So, you know, I like what the Planning Commission has come up with on achieving the rural space portion of this, but in my constituents, the biggest question I hear is, well, what are you going to do to quell some of this growth? And this isn't addressing the issue of the density. And, you know, I would like to see that we, you know, push something back to the Planning Commission that says, you know, we're going to put a number on RA and A1 that is going to decrease the density. And, you know, that, I appreciate all the work that you and the planning commission have put towards this, and it's a pretty elaborate presentation here, but I really think that, you know, I'd like to see more that where we're controlling some of this density.
And Mr. Chairman, before other members weigh in on that particular topic, this cluster option, if you will, could be done in a reduced density fashion. The Planning Commission is not recommending that, but the Planning Commission is just recommending that the board consider a cluster option. You could, you know, for example, this particular piece of property here that can yield 26 lots over a 10-year period under our current scheme, you could say, well, this, you know, if you increase the minimum density, you know, from 5 to 10, in this particular example, there's still a lot of road frontage. That's what yields the little bit higher yield than some parcels. But if you went to 10, you're looking at 18 lots. So you're looking at a reduction of 30% of the density. That wouldn't be the case. It wouldn't be the same 30% for not a lot, probably less than that, because there are a lot of lots that don't have this amount of road frontage. But just using it as an example, you can pick a different density scheme and still apply a cluster. I just wanted the board to be aware of that. So.
Sam, did the Planning Commission talk about or take into consideration the lawsuit challenging our time-based subdivision?
Yes, Supervisor, they did. They brought that question up a couple of times, and they're aware of it. They're aware of the legal concerns with any time-based system based on an Attorney General letter from many, many years ago already, and then some work that was done or a suit that was filed in Orange County several years ago. In that light, we did adjust our ordinance in 2013, I believe, in response to the Orange County matter. We believe our ordinance was strengthened at that time, but whether it would survive, you know, a full test or not, it hasn't been tested, so we don't know.
So I definitely agree that the clusters will help maintain a lot more areas that are capable of being farmed, a lot more open space, which some of these counties that don't have it anymore wish that their government would have allowed for more of it. I do feel, though, for us to be able to keep up with our low tax rate, our school capacities, and just the fact of the matter that a lot of areas where this growth is happening is not where our transportation money is going, nor is it anytime soon. It's not really within all the collectors. So I think that reducing the density will help us maintain our school systems. I personally am not looking forward to building our third high school, but if we continue these 100 lots and all of this building that's going on, we're never going to catch up no matter how many data centers we build in this county. So based on all of the stuff that I've heard from many landowners, many farmers, many people, the same thing that Chairman Bates said, like, how are we going to control this growth to the point where we can still maintain our quality of life here in Culpeper? So with that, I appreciate all the work that the staff and Planning Commission has done, but I believe that I would like to make a motion that we reduce the RA density to 1 every 6 acres, the A1 density to 1 every 10 acres, include this cluster option, and the private road requirements.
Would you, as a part of your motion, are you still including that you still have the option to do time-based if you want it?
Yes. The cluster is just an option based on their time base would now be 6 and 10 instead of 3 and 5.
Those be done at the same densities as you're proposing? Or to follow what, I'm not sure.
I'm just trying to
Supervisor-
understand better, yeah.
That's what I'm trying to understand is the clarification, are you asking for the densities to be different or the exact same? For it to allow the time-based option?
To reduce, leave the time-based option, the road frontage requirements, but have minimum lot sizes or your densities be in RA instead of 1 for every 3 acres, 1 for every 6. In A1, 1 for every 10 instead of 1 for every 5. That also allows for even the minimum lots to be able to qualify for land use taxation for farming and agricultural enterprises, which it doesn't allow today. As soon as you put a house on our minimum lots, you no longer qualify, regardless if you do have commodities that you sell off that land. So I think this allows for the increase in farming, which the 10 acres and less have increased, where the larger ones have decreased. A lot of that has a lot of pushback with housing coming in. But I think that will accomplish the comprehensive plan goals, as well as allow us a fighting chance to keep up with the growth in Culpeper that is always going to be there.
Second motion. I think that it bears mentioning that over my tenure on this board, if you look at the number of acres of residential that are out there, the residential zoned land has not been developed. It will be the last thing to be developed, because people come into the Culpeper community and they go looking at dirt roads and try to find the cheapest land that they can find to develop, because it's better for their bottom line. I mean, I don't blame them for that, but I think what we have not seen here, that we've seen in the past, is that when you have these big developments go in and the neighborhood sees them, and they see that you can't get a school bus and you can't get a car to pass each other on these dirt roads that cannot handle the traffic. I mean, what we really need is a public facilities ordinance, or the ability to have a public facilities ordinance that requires you to have the right type of infrastructure in place in order to do it to start with. But in order to be able to, as Ms. Gugino says, to keep up with this, you've got to look at some sort of density reduction, or we're going to become a Fairfax. And the last thing developed here will be the residential areas. I mean, it doesn't make sense. You have to use zoning in order to cause the development to go where you intend for it to go. And it hasn't happened. It's starting to happen up there near me, but for what? How long has it been sitting there? 20-some years? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm still trying to understand this a little better. So my concern is that if RA goes to 6 acres, you could actually be increasing density in RA, because it's 10 acres off the road right now. And I'm not sure it's the intention of this board to increase density in RA. I don't want to increase density in RA.
RA is 3 and 5, isn't it?
No, it's 3 on the road, 10 off the road. So average, it's going to be a lot more 10-acre lots than 3-acre lots.
Is that correct,
So for
Sam?
example, if you had to Supervisor Underwood's, yes, if you had a 20-acre RA piece that didn't have any road frontage, you'd be limited to 2 10-acre lots today, but a 6-acre density would say 3 lots, potentially. So yes.
Okay, so I was making the assumption that the off-road frontage was going to stay the same. So I can amend my motion to say that the off-acre, or the off-road frontage would stay what it is today, which I believe in both is 10
It's
acres.
10 acres today, yes.
Which is the same in A1, correct?
That's correct.
But then you've added
Today's-
increased density there
yes.
as well. Or you've kept it the same. You kept it the same. You're not actually cutting it.
Well, we cut the road frontage side of it, but not the, do we want, I mean, I would be for moving that to 20, 10 in RA and 20 in A1, the off-road frontage.
My concern with treating A1 and RA differently is where A1 and RA are, in many cases, is almost random. As an example, where I live, one side of my road, well, not where I live, on Riva Road, going all the way up to Shanktown, one side is RA, the other side is A1. There's literally no difference other than one side's RA and the other side's A1. So if the goal of the board, and I'm not sure it is, but if the goal is to reduce density, perhaps what we would do is what Sam mentioned, or Mr. McLaren mentioned, where you could say the density for clustering could be 1 right per 10 acres everywhere. So it doesn't matter if you got road frontage or not. It doesn't matter if you're A1 or RA. It's just for every 10 acres you have, You have one right if you choose to cluster. But if you don't choose to cluster, you can do what you're doing right now. Now, I think with that, you'd probably see quite a few people still choose to cluster because of the lack of the time element, and you would reduce density, and you could couple a PDR with that. So it may be worthwhile to look at that rather than treating A1 and RA differently, because I'm not sure we're structured to have major differences in density in A1 and RA. We'd need to look at a comprehensive rezoning, in my opinion.
Initially, the RA was supposed to be, came out from residential and then moved into the A1 as a kind of problem.
It didn't really happen that way.
One option that the planning commission did consider was merging the zoning districts for that, for subdividing purposes at least, anyway. So.
Are there some other standards that we should be looking at to put in the clustering option? I mean, we're looking at the roads that would go into the cluster, I'm sure, how they connect into the state highways now. Should we be talking about some sidewalks? Should we be talking about some open space within the cluster? Should we be talking about the standards of the public road that this would go on? Should these all be things that are in consideration?
In my opinion, if you did consider those, you would reduce if the landowner had a choice, you would reduce their incentive to do a cluster because you're increasing the costs. I mean, I look at the nice neighborhoods out in the Salem district. Realhurst doesn't have any sidewalks and does just fine, and I'm not sure you could recover the cost of a sidewalk even there.
My concern is that we create a bunch of little communities that 10 or 15 years from now decide they need some improvements, and those improvements be borne by the rest of the taxpayers, when they should probably have been included into the cost of the subdivision when it was built.
We got a lot of little pockets right now, and I
We-
haven't seen any of them requested.
Well, we've had a lot of requests about road issues.
Oh, well, we're gonna have that.
And
Sam, can you describe just briefly the impact if we looked at merging RA into A1?
Supervisor Lee, just to kind of piggyback on what Supervisor Underwood said, that there was some consideration about there's not that big a difference, basically, between the A1 and RA when it comes to subdividing. So maybe you look at combining, basically merging the two districts. But the creation originally, the intent was to create a transition zone, if you will, between the residential areas or more dense areas to the agricultural, which are in theory supposed to be less dense areas. That was the original intent of it. But from a subdividing standpoint, there's not a huge difference. Where you see your biggest difference on any of our scenarios, today's scenario, is when you have a lot of road frontage, as far as your lot yield. So, and that's why we've used this one as an example, this particular piece.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Can you restate the motion just for the record so we're clear on this? You've got the RA 6 acres, 10 off the road, is that right? Did you
Yeah.
amend that to that?
Yes,
And then A1 is 10 acres and
10 still off the
10
road.
off the road, okay. And then we're still going to look at the cluster option,
Yes,
the private road standards, and you had said something about time-based, and that's,
so if you do just this, if you do the cluster, then was that, in that option, that was no time-based, right? Or was that still
That's
time-based?
correct. So that would allow the lots, for example, the one we have on the screen, to be yielded, that would be in a decreased density for this particular example at this point if the motion succeeds, or if we go forward with that. But you could yield them all at one time.
Okay, yeah, so no time-based on the cluster, but still a time-based as we do today for the 2 lots and a residual.
okay.
And this would be a recommendation to go back to the planning commission
Correct.
to study, to do what?
To go ahead and review the draft ordinance and have their public hearing and move forward with finalizing the details.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Years and years ago, we used to have public hearings on subdivisions all the time when they reached a major subdivision versus a minor subdivision. If we go back and go to this cluster, will that be reinstated where you have a certain number of lots will create the need for a public hearing to happen at the planning commission level and the board level, or will they be administratively done?
Supervisor, my take would be that they would remain an administrative function or ministerial function, like they are today, no matter what their lot yield is.
The only thing that would spur that would be a rezoning to go after more
That's correct.
density.
So any type of rezoning would still go through the normal procedure.
Yeah, but
Neighbors would be
I'm aware
notified,
of the
public
rezoning.
hearings, right. But as far as a subdivision, my intention would be to remain as a ministerial act. And it works better that way, in my opinion. A lot of times the public hearings for subdivision of a by right activity that the board had already deemed as by right in the zoning, whatever the zoning says you can do, it's just a source of frustration.
Well, it is on both sides
Yeah.
because of the fact that once you dot the
Because
i's
it's
across
hard,
the
once
t's,
the
it's a done
once the
deal
zoning
anyway.
is set, and
Yeah.
the subdivision should be ministerial, in my opinion, after that, so.
Thank you.
Sam, what is the trigger point for the subdivision? In our subdivision ordinance, there's a certain number of houses, and after you get to that number of houses, then it's a whole different set of parameters on what's required in that development. Isn't that right? Is that, or no?
As far as review or process,
What's required? When Supervisor Durr's talking about sidewalks and such, I know that one time, there was if you're within half mile of a commercial facility that
That's
has
correct.
sidewalks, you're
Yes.
required to do,
the board recently, not recently, it's been a few years now, but did amend the subdivision ordinance to require pedestrian improvements in certain areas where you have 20 lots or more, and you're next to a school or within a half mile of a school or a commercial center, you would need to have sidewalks. We did pursue a facility standards manual probably about 8 years ago, and at that time, it was not recommended by the planning commission or the board to move forward with that. We did look at a full facility standards manual at that time. So the concern there was, if I remember correctly, was cost of development, and increasing the cost of development and not allowing for attainable homes.
So what the planning commission has come up with on this clustering, if it's, say, for example, 3 houses or 5 houses, up to 25 houses, are we going to have the same requirements when it comes to roads? Is this what we're hoping to achieve, would be the same type of road standards regardless of the number of houses, which would entail maintenance agreements, width of right-of-way, width of travel way?
Yes.
All that would be the same regardless of the number of houses, is that?
I think you could set a threshold for that, and I would say that we look at, an early threshold of 5 lots or more. That's typically aligned with a commercial entrance for 5 homes on a state road. And I think that would be a good starting point. You could go below that if the board saw fit to do that, but I think 5 homes or more puts it in a category to allow for for a specific standard.
I actually think, or at least a version I saw, there were 3 different levels, and it was tied to the standards of VDOT's entrance requirements.
Yeah.
So if you're just a private entrance 1, there are no standards. You can be up to a shared drive, so up to 2. If you are a low-volume commercial entrance, meaning you're doing 5 or fewer lots, I believe, then that would be a second set of standards that would be less than if you're more than 5, which is a full commercial entrance, and then you would have considerable standards. And in my opinion, it would also be worthwhile to allow them to build it to state road standards to contribute it to VDOT.
So you start off with 5 houses, or 2 houses, and
Right.
5 years down the road, we've added 4 more, so now we're at the
Gotta
6.
go to the next standard.
Then you have to, that road would have to be upgraded as those more houses were being built.
Yeah, the state requires that for entrance standards.
Okay.
So I think it's a justifiable or, a good basis point to do that for the road as well, so.
But as those plans are being developed, if they're going to take the clustering option, and their option calls for 20 houses, when they build the first two, shouldn't we put those standards in place right out of the gate?
I think you put the standards with the approval of the lots, meaning if you're approving 20 lots, you got to build to the standards for the 20 lots, not with the same thing with the entrance. If you have 20 lots, VDOT's going to make you do a commercial entrance. I'm pretty sure, Sam. Yeah.
That's correct, yes.
So if you
Based
got to
on
do a
that.
commercial entrance, you got to build a road that meets the commercial entrance standards.
Then would it meet VDOT standards, is what you're saying?
Not necessarily. This, I think as proposed, there's a set of private standards that
Yes.
maybe's
Yes.
comparable, taken from other counties. Or you could do VDOT standards if you thought the math would work. I'm not sure we want to force VDOT standards because I don't know that that's economical. You may just see a bunch of people doing the time-based.
Sam, you had talked about, just a minute ago, you mentioned a set of standards or a
Facility standards.
facility
manual.
standards. Is that something that would be reasonable to have the planning commission look at as they develop this next step or go the next route? For the different options that would fit in there and what that would look like?
It could, you know, I would want to limit it to probably the road discussion first, but you could develop other standards. Your open space example, you know, for example, when you're looking at an open space, there are certain jurisdictions that require amenities, for example. You know, I don't know if the board would ever want to go in that direction for a private subdivision, but there are facility standards manuals for, you know, what that needs to look like, what needs to be there, sidewalks, what the driveway itself coming off the road. There's certain way you can get really detailed with a facility standards manual. So I would want the board to have direction to the planning commission on what to limit it to. But I think it would be appropriate to have a standard. We don't have that today for the road.
Ms. Gugino, would you consider adding that to your motion?
Yeah, if that's the way that is a better option of going than just having these standards in the ordinance.
The way I look at it initially is it's one and the same. I mean, we're looking at developing specific standards for the private road. If the board wanted to go beyond that and develop specific sidewalk standards, you know, things like that, then that's going to take a little more time.
I'm not looking for specific places that we're sending the planning commission. What I'm saying is, in their consideration of this, they should include what they would like to look at facility-wise, facility standards.
Okay, yeah.
Not specifically roads, sidewalks, but they should consider this.
As a separate function to
As
this.
part of this review.
As part of this, but it could go off in its own train.
Yes.
Okay.
Sam, to build off of Supervisor Rosenberger's statement about, you know, the R1 is going to be the last ones to get developed. And I agree with him because the properties that are out away from the town environs that are not real good roads going to them, to me, that's a big concern. When you have a narrow gravel road that has large acreage lots that could possibly be bought and, you know, whether it be 25, 30, 40 houses put out here. And now we've got school buses going out there, and these school buses, having two buses or a bus and a car trying to pass on some of these gravel roads, the width of them, have we ever had any tool that would say, okay, well, we look at the overall condition of the roads that are surrounding this parcel with all this road frontage? What kind of traffic volume can that road handle? And I mean, to me, that's a concern.
Yeah. At this point, I'd have to research that a little more, Chairman Bates. I believe Culpeper County at one point had, you know, an ordinance that was called a road carrying capacity ordinance. And I believe that was deemed not properly enabled by the state, which means that unless something has changed since that time, which it very well could have, I don't know of an enabling standard, but I would want to work with Ms. Weimer's office and see if there's an enabling standard that from the state that would allow us to do that. Because in the past, there has not been. I understand it clearly, and it makes sense to me as well from a planning standpoint to not overload a road that we know is not sufficient for our carrying capacity, but I don't know that we can use that, unfortunately, as a standard.
Well, you would think VDOT would weigh in on that. I mean, they weigh in on these entranceways, and when you're
Sure.
talking a private road or 2 houses or 4 houses, that before they would approve an entranceway, they would look at the overall condition of these roads, the traffic counts that it's handling now, the width of it, and I know some of the roads in the Catalpa district,
Yeah.
the width of them, literally, somebody has to pull off to the side of the road for a school bus to pass. So,
right.
yeah, hopefully that would be something VDOT would look at. So, again, we have a motion and a second on the floor, has been amended.
I got just a little bit
Yes, sir.
further discussion,
Okay,
if you
all right.
don't mind. I mean, it's a pretty big thing. It's 88% of the county. I believe if it is sent to the planning commission as right now, there will be an incentive to go divide all the road frontage that hadn't been divided as much as you can, as quick as you can, into 3 and 5 acre lots. As an example, I have surveyors working on it right now. And I know many others that do. If we wanted to curtail that incentive, I believe it's possible to do so while also reducing density. So what you could do is say that your density in cluster is 1 per 10. Just wherever you are, you're 1 per 10. So if you're choosing to do the cluster, you are going to be reducing density. But there still may be enough density that voluntarily the cluster option will be chosen. Because if someone's going to buy the property and they got to wait more than 5 years to do all that, or more than 10 years to do the divisions in the example that Sam gave, economically, you may be better off doing the 10. But if you kept the time-based as is now as an alternative, where you don't do the 3 and the 5 on the road, what that may do instead is reduce the incentive to do 3 and 5 on the road now, because you don't need to. So that would cause people to wait until they sold, which is a lot of what happens. A lot of families wait until the generation passes, there's a stepped up in basis, then it's sold to someone else. So if you didn't change the road density in the time-based option, but did change it to just 10 for everything in the clustering, I think incentives may be aligned where you see fewer divisions than if you don't do it that way. And I think there may be support to pass it that way and pretty broadly. But if not, we may have a brief rush of 3 and 5 along the road. I'm saying, yeah, make everything 10 acres for the cluster. So it doesn't matter if you're A1 or A. It would actually be a little less density than I think is being proposed. And if you do time-based, you can do it as you're doing now. I think the advantage of that is you're not creating the sense of urgency. So you're reducing incentives to act quickly, which means you're preserving the opportunity to do the 10 clustering in the future. I really think it'll achieve the objective that you're aiming for and cause a lot less rush to the courthouse. I know in one case it would.
Well, when we keep the time base, and I'm looking at this example forward, that's what we're trying to stay away from. And when you've got 26 lots that are just, short of a better term, willy-nilly placed anywhere.
This would change that. This would, yes, because it's 180, that's right, it'd make it 18 if you cluster. Or you gotta wait all that time and then do 26 divided like that, it would become 18. I mean, you tell me, whoever knows that area, tell me, but it would become 18. It would reduce density.
My only thing is I still struggle to the fact that RA is an agriculturally zoned area that in its smallest lot size, you cannot get the same benefits as other agriculturally zoned areas because you no longer qualify for any type of agriculture assistance with the county. I don't understand why it was 3 to begin with, to the fact of, then you're just saying that, yeah, that whole area was just meant for houses, and what's the difference between RA and R1 other than the lot size? With the movement of smaller farms, because of the lack of land, to me, we would have to add that capability of RA at least going to some standard where it can have that land use taxation. It can have the qualifications of agricultural use. I mean, A1's the same way. 5 acres, you put a house on it, you get bumped out because now you got 4 acres left. That's one of the drivers for increasing those lot sizes, because agriculturally zoned land is supposed to be for agricultural practices. We get pushed out constantly. We get petitions signed against us and all kinds of things when we try to do agriculture on agriculturally zoned land. And moving to these larger lot sizes, decreasing density, allows for it really to be driven home that these areas are for agriculture, not for subdivisions and housing developments. Even with the cluster option, I still think that is intruding in agriculture, but to have that option of that capability of making that kind of money off of the land, I don't want to take completely away, because I agree that's not fair, what we've had so far. But leaving it 3 and 5, to me, just doesn't make sense. You might as well just say, okay, that's just residentially zoned areas.
Under the current motion, Sam, or Supervisor Gugino, can you please clarify the cluster option under the current motion would be allowed where?
In the A1 or RA zoning,
And would be at the densities of.
10-acre density.
Would be 10-acre densities in both.
For both, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
While everybody's mulling this over, I think it'd be interesting just to know, I didn't figure R3 or R4, but under the existing acres in R1 and R2, that's over 18,700 houses. So that's a lot of houses. And that doesn't include R3 or R4.
To me, I mean, if we want to do the 6 and the 10, okay, the closer, I mean, the board's going to do whatever the board's going to do, but the closer you get to allowing what is allowed now, the less contentious it's going to be. So I'm just thinking, like, if someone's going to do time-based, and you're saying 6 acres is, well, 1, the savings for land use is very little. 2, you can get it on a 3-acre lot if you want. Just join an ag forestal district. We're going to have one this evening that's 4 acres that's in an ag forestal district. But, and it's been in there for 20-plus years.
Doesn't mean it qualifies for land use. You can go in an agricultural forest district with any amount of acres you want to, but it doesn't necessarily qualify you. That does not qualify you for land use taxation.
Okay. Then having the savings of land use on 6 acres versus 5 is the building site is the large cost of the parcel. So your savings is less than $300 a year in all the cases I've been able to calculate on that 1 incremental acre. If there's still a reason to do it, fine. I'm not sure the savings is the reason. If the reason is the rural character, you want to have a minimum, even if you're on the road, of 6 or 10. I believe you're going to see, it would be a lot less controversial done the other way, but, yeah.
Well, it still makes sense to me to the smaller lot size that you allow. I wouldn't go with the 2 acre minimum. I would say acre, acre and a half,
Fine.
if you're able to do that, acre and a half.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
But a lot of that's going to be based off of the type of soils and what
That's
the
right.
health department says
That's right.
I mean, that's something that happened in the 70s. There's subdivisions out there that are on small lot sizes without reserves for drain fields, which is,
right.
you know, leading to a lot of problems now. So I think that by placing a number on that arbitrarily is not the smart thing to do. This needs to be based off of the type of soils and health departments, you know,
Mr. Chairman,
categorizing.
one thing I would like to clarify if I could on that, because the proposal that we had coming forward from the planning commission was the 2 acre minimum. Staff has no qualms of rewriting that, you know, into something smaller than that, but it would be nice to have that direction too. It sounds like there is that potential direction, so.
I mean, do we have to specify a minimum? It would just be the minimum that meets the Department of Health standards on drain fields and wells and, I mean,
I'd almost want to at least have R1 minimum. I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
go.
You have to have some sort of minimum. I agree with you. You can't have a
Yeah.
quarter acre lot size out in, you know, that, no.
well, you're not going to physically be able to put the drain
Exactly.
field, but if you put in the requirements that the minimum lot size has to dictate that you meet the Virginia Department of Health standards for drain fields and wells, that's going to dictate your minimum lot size regardless.
Exactly, yeah. That's a good point to put in there.
And if we
somewhere.
know what that minimum lot size is, then, yeah, we can go ahead and put in that minimum if we think they can squeeze it into an acre and a half, or maybe is 2 really what we're looking at.
Yeah, it does depend on the land, you know, and not trying to throw anybody a curveball with this one, but, you know, just keep in mind that we're not looking at other ordinance changes. And, you know, we've talked a lot about chickens recently. You know, we've talked about about other subjects, you know, that come along with this. And, you know, you get to some smaller lot sizes if they don't have covenants. The land uses may become even more questionable. And I'm just
Yeah.
throwing that out there as just a hypothetical. I'm not trying to, when you're looking at land division, yes, I think that makes sense. And it makes sense to want to preserve a larger open space tract. But when you're talking about land uses, it may get a little sticky. So, but just wanted to mention that.
I mean, I think 2 acres is fair.
That's a
It
good
gives
point.
enough privacy between neighbors if they do have agricultural uses, which they would be allowed.
I mean, we've got R1 lots now with horses on them that have
Yeah.
special use permits for that, so that's a very good point. That's something
I just want, like I said, I'm not trying to derail the conversation. You know, from a land use perspective, it does make sense, you know, to leave a larger open space if you can, you know, and have a smaller lot and not yield as much land for that home you know, so.
Further discussion? We're clear on the motion? No, we're not. Okay, Ms. Gugino?
So RA and A1 time division subdivides are 6 acres and 10 acres instead of 3 and 5. Off the road is still 10 acres. And then cluster options with a density of 1 per 10 acres with the road, private road requirements
Tied to entrance type.
tied to entrance type. Yeah, the road requirements are tied, based on entrance type.
Okay, motion in the second. All those in favor of the motion to send to the planning commission, the motion that was just presented, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? It's 5-1, Ms. Ellis.
My sole reason for opposition is the concern about the 3 and the 5. Otherwise, it makes sense to me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, moving on to new business, there is none. On item 6.0, our committee reports. First up, we have our Public Works Committee, and Supervisor Underwood.
Yes, sir. The committee brings forward to the board a motion to direct staff to pursue the extension of a water main from the town of Culpeper system at St. Jameson Road to serve the Cherry Hill Road area around the Culpeper County Solid Waste Transfer Station.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Mr. Howard, if you would like to.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the county received bids for the Cherry Hill water system, which was to construct the water treatment plant distribution system from the well that we acquired years ago to serve residents around the landfill. Those bids came in at $4.6 million. That would serve be limited to 50 connections until we found another water source, and would require an operating cost of about $105,000 a year. The committee considered extending the water line from St. Jameson Road out 522. The engineer's estimate to do that was $7.7 million, and we would do that under our interjurisdictional agreement with the town and the county, and so therefore we would have no operating cost for that system. There's currently $3.9 million in the CIP, and if we is approved, we proceed with design and acquisition of easements. There would be about 45 to 50 easements required, whether we were on either the west or east side of 522, going out from St. Jameson Road. We've already acquired all the easements around the transfer station and former landfill right now to run the distribution system.
I have a concern. And based off of the conversations we were just talking about with sewer, if we're going to run the water line to Cherry Hill, have we ever considered, if we're going to be digging the ditch for the water line, that we look at running sewer out that way? Because there are a lot of houses on 522 between town environs and the Cherry Hill that have failing drain fields. And is that something that we could look at a possible option of that?
We certainly could. There are some areas out there, some subdivisions with failing septics. Once we identified a location for a pump station, we could run the force main along 522 in the same ditch as the water line. And then at that point, you'd only have to connect the pump station and target area to that force main. But we would recommend, if you would like to go ahead and include that in design with the ditches open, all you'd have to do would be to add the material cost of the pipe. Since it would have to be a force main along 522, but you could put the pump station in a drainage area along 522, along some of the subdivisions that have failing septics. We looked at the cost to do a small gravity system in a couple of subdivisions. They're off of AP Hill and Pelham Manor subdivision. The engineer's estimate for that was $3 million if we did it in conjunction with the water line. There's about $600,000 of savings for just the section of sewer line that would follow the water. So we would at minimum recommend running the force main, even if we don't connect it when you put the water line in for that segment. And then it would be deciding if you want to sewer the subdivision or not, how many people would be interested, who would be interested in donating easements, or you'd have to require all of them. That would be the next step if you want to start sewering an area. Ultimately, that area will go down across the Powell property into town if that ever develops, but that's a long way.
Well, it sounds like to me that would be a smart move if you've got a ditch that's open and we know there's problems out that way, and I don't think they're going to get any better. General Longstreet Avenue, AP Hill, Pelham Manor in general, there's a lot of problems out there that can be solved with town sewer, so that would be my recommendation.
Question, if we would add that to the design and stuff while we were going. Would that be a separate option that we can choose to execute at a time that we approve the contract?
Yes, we can include that as an add alternate when we do the bids, so you'd have that number and you could decide whether you wanted to include it or not. That would be easy to do.
Because I think more or less the question is you said it's another $3 million.
That would be for a full build-out to serve all of Pelham Manor with gravity sewers, assuming everybody wanted to connect or could connect.
Okay.
The segment that we would build in Route 522 would be on the order of 700,000 or 600,000 of sewer line, or even less, probably. It would be material only.
Okay.
But we could include it as an add alternate with a bid and bring that back to you.
I guess the Public Works Committee can amend its motion to say include it as an add alternate to bring back to us.
I would second that amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just for clarity purposes here, so we're roughly $3.5 million more than what's in the current CIP, but Paul, I assume what we're shooting for here is to look into obtaining the right-of-ways and getting the design done with the budget we have, and then we'd be probably budgeting the remainder of the money in the upcoming budget year for construction and keep Public Works apprised as we go forward with what the costs are really looking like. Is that?
Yes, our intention right now would be to start design and acquiring the easements. Yep. And we have plenty of money in the CIP to do that, and then when we come into this budget cycle coming up, we can look at the additional money for the remainder of the project in the CIP.
And that design would not matter whether the sewer line was added to it or not.
Correct. It's going to follow the same route.
Any further discussion?
2 pipes instead of 1.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
So we have an amended motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Yes, Ms. Ellis.
All right, next, the committee brings forward to the board with no recommendation the discussion of a request from Don Gibson to extend sewer services to tax map parcels 34-4, 34-34A from the Culpeper Industrial Air Park.
Paul, you're up again.
Second. Oh, there was no.
Can you pull up the preliminary site plan, Kim? Included in your package is a request from Mr. Gibson, who owns the 2 parcels there, highlighted in red across 29 from the industrial air park, to extend a private sewer system, extend sewer system from the industrial air park to his property that would ultimately be owned by the county. He's proposing a pump station on the 2 properties over there that would be similar to the ones we have in Mitchell's, where they're small E1 pump stations, and would go into a small force main that would come back to the county's manhole there behind Southern States. The system, as proposed, would not meet our minimum standards for a public pump station because normally they're larger and they serve larger geographic areas. But this site is limited geographically between 29 and the railroad, and the VDOT requirement to cross 29 would it be publicly owned and maintained. If 29 were not there, this could be a private sewer system connected into our system. But right now, those parcels are served with a failing well and septic, and he has requested permission to do this. It would all be funded at his expense, installed at his expense, and then donated to the county to serve those parcels in between 29 and the railroad. And Mr. Gibson is here if you have questions for him.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul?
I do have a question for Paul. So this would be dedicated back to the county. So any type of expansion to that, whether it be the 2 other properties that are there between 29 and the railroad, or expanding further in either direction, would have to come through here again?
Any expansion would happen, the board would control the service area. Once you adopt the service area, then they could add on within that, if that answers your question. If the service area is limited to these 2 parcels, then only these 2 parcels would be served.
Okay, and any
But once the
expansion-
sewer's on the parcel, they can do whatever they want to do within zoning on the parcel.
Okay, right, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Paul, would that be sized, to say, for instance, if the Gonzalez or Maddox property had failing drain fields, that they would be able to, that the line would be enough to accommodate those other two parcels? Is that
Yes.
so?
Mr. Chairman, have alternative systems been looked at as a possibility rather than extend that water, that line that far?
Alternative systems on site for sewer disposal?
An alternative drain field system.
I do not know.
Is that applicant here could
Yes.
elaborate? Mr. Gibson?
Morning. Based on what the health department told me, alternatives are not available to me, or I would do that. So a little background on the property. Where you see the green line coming over, that used to be Oakwood Animal Hospital. We closed Oakwood Animal Hospital back during COVID in 2021 because we had sewer problems associated with it, and we couldn't conduct business on the premises because of that. Our ultimate goal for that property was to build a bigger animal hospital that would serve both a small and large animal. On the site, offer ambulatory and emergency services for large animal and with a small animal clinic attached to it. Can't do that without public sewer. We can't even run an animal hospital with the current sewer system that we have. Taking the sewer over to the bigger parcel, essentially to rezone that property, and that would then pay for the cost of bringing the sewer under 29, excuse me, so that we could build the animal hospital. That's what's driving all of this. So, questions?
Questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
I have a question
I
before
guess-
you go. So then, you're anticipating coming for a rezoning for the animal hospital
Not
at a
for the
later
animal-
date?
Not for the animal hospital, that parcel's zone commercial now. But the parcel that the post office is on, we would be coming back to ask for rezone to commercial, yeah.
Okay.
It all kind of works together in a big package, because you can't justify the expense of bringing sewer across just for the animal hospital. It's just that the math isn't there. So you'd have to rezone commercial, sell that to somebody, I don't know, and then use those funds to justify bringing the sewer under. So that's what we're doing. We currently run large animal through our Catlet Animal Hospital, but 85% of our large animal clients are within 15 miles of Elkwood, and that's why we want to move large animal to Elkwood. For instance, Dr. Stillwell, Virginia Stillwell, lives out here on her grandfather's farm. She travels all the way into Catlet. You know, if it's a large animal day, she gets in the truck, drives all the way back to Culpeper, and services this area. So from a business standpoint, it just doesn't make sense. We'll have 4 large animal vets by the first of the year. And so we need a bigger parcel, we need a bigger building to properly service the area for large animal. Furthermore, there's no ambulatory or emergency services of any kind in Fauquier or Culpeper that we know of for large animal. It's a big need. This is a perfect area because it is a large agricultural area, and you know, we think it would work really well. Having said that, my daughter now owns the animal hospitals. We sold to her in '22, and she'll make that decision. 5 years ago, she was ready to build, but we couldn't get sewer. So once I know that we can get sewer, and I'm pretty confident we can rezone that to commercial, then I'll go back to her and I'll say, okay, we're a go out at Elkwood, and she'll make that decision.
So the post office isn't zoned commercial now?
No. No. And that drain system is failing also. I just got a letter from the company that monitors it that said it's almost my age. So it's going to fail, which would mean that would go away, the post office.
Further questions? Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the motion that we approve the request to extend the sewer services to tax map parcels 34-4 and 34-4A from the Culpeper Industrial Air Park.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Moving on to our Building and Grounds Committee.
No action items, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Gugino, Rules Committee.
The committee brings forward to the board a motion to approve the calendar year 2024 voluntary contribution program with no change of categories from calendar year 2023.
Motion and a second. Discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, next is our Economic Development Report. Mr. Brian Rothmel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Wanted to give you a chance. I have now been in Culpeper for 3 years. It's been a wonderful 3 years. September 1st is my anniversary, always easy to remember. I wanted to give a chance to kind of show you, I haven't done an annual report in that time, and I wanted an opportunity to kind of show where we've been in those 3 years. When I got here, we were primarily focused on business attraction and retention. We did have Be a Culpeper Local, but it was a shop local campaign only. We did TV ads. Businesses could be a part of it if they wanted to. They'd have to ask, and if they paid, they could get additional perks, such as being listed on our website and getting a link. In order to get a link, you had to pay to participate. Then we also had the farm tour, which was organized by our business development coordinator. And that's really all that we were focusing on. When we talk about our business attraction, we've led the region in job growth in 2022, 2023. We were second in 2024. We led the region in capital investment 22, 23, and second this year as well. AWS going to Louisa is difficult to compete with on many factors. We completed the Culpeper Tech Zone. We have that all completely zoned now. And we've strengthened our employee pipeline in collaboration with CTEC. Workinculpeper.com, very proud of that launching. I'll actually be speaking tomorrow at a regional event discussing workforce development in the rural areas, and I'll be talking about work in Culpeper. And then in 2022, I was named Rising Star of Virginia Economic Development Association. When we get into Be a Culpeper Local, this was something that I even mentioned in my interview when I was looking at the job, is we could do a lot in small business development. We reworked that program so that it was for small business development. Everything's for everyone. Any business can participate. There are no pay options. I'm really not a big fan of those. And with that, we were able to continue the Shop Local campaign that we were doing in different ways, but also bring in the business support for our small businesses, because I felt that was vital. We created the Culpeper County Conference, which is focused on Culpeper businesses. The most important thing, though, is we were bringing classes to the community, in the community, that they weren't having to leave Culpeper to go to these classes. We began the Culpeper Business Appreciation Reception this year to celebrate our small businesses. We have a monthly newsletter as well as a business spotlight. And we just launched Facts and Snacks, a monthly class, where you have in-person instruction in our office. We'll provide facts and snacks, give you something to chew on. So Coming out of that, our first year of refocusing Be a Culpeper local, our business development coordinator, Winona, came. She operates this and said, hey, we're going to do a Shop Local week. Okay, how can we get that going? It's quickly becoming a tentpole event for our office. Any business, service, or retail can participate. It's free for them. We provide tote bags for their customers, and we also give them one post highlighting them on social media. Throughout the week, we share facts and information of the benefits of shopping local. Businesses are encouraged but not required to provide Be a Culpeper Local Week promotion. And then customers who complete their card by utilizing 5 businesses, they can earn a unique Choose Culpeper t-shirt. Very proud of this program. The first year that we had 20 completed cards. The second year we had about 25. For us, it was not about how many cards are completed. It's more about giving the businesses a chance to get spotlighted. That changed this year. 120 completed cards. We had a 480% increase. We had 40 businesses participated. 1,200 transactions happened at those businesses with an economic impact to the community of over $40,000. The businesses love it. You see the Country Shops of Culpeper, what a great and inclusive event for the community. It's important to us that this is not just for our shopping districts that we typically see promoted, but for everyone of Culpeper. A great time for Collector's Den. Willow Shade, I love the help to ramp up businesses for local small businesses because they often do not have the funds to do that. So just the advertising has been tremendous. We're really proud of this program. When we submitted it to the International Economic Development Council, IEDC is the #1 economic development association for practitioners in the world. The economic developers that reviewed it also agreed. While this is a small event, the clear impact as well as that everyone wanted to participate in strong collaboration along key local partners. Because of that, we earned a bronze medal for this program. So we're really excited to announce that for y'all, that we got bronze for Be a Culpeper Local Week. For Choose Culpeper Farms, we have Culpeper Harvest Days Farm Tour. It's a long-standing tradition in our community. It's great. However, Winona spends 10 months of the year working on it. She has tremendous knowledge of the farms that are participating and helps them throughout the year when they need assistance. Ag development happens across the state. However, when we looked at it, I said, we can't spend 10 months for one weekend, and that's it. That's the only benefit that the community gets. We need to spend 12 months and give the benefit throughout the year. How can we celebrate farming throughout the year? We were cognizant when we started this that this would not be easy. I'm from the government, I'm here to help, is the joke, and that's what we were literally coming to say. So we met with area farmers, both ones that we knew and then ones that we had just met, and we spoke at the local Farm Bureau and Ag Council meetings to kind of show what we thought we could do and what we were hearing. That launched ChooseCulpeperFarms.com in February 23. That was built with the farmers in mind. The most important thing is that website has 0 stock photography. That is a Culpeper website that was built with what we heard, and we can adapt it to the communities that have the community needs that come up. For her efforts, Winona Pritz won Advocate in Marketing in 2023 from the local Farm Bureau. We also have the monthly farm highlight directed by the farm. So Winona goes to the farm, asks them what they would like to highlight about their operation, and we're able to put that out. We also have Sips of Culpeper. This is one idea of how we adapted. When we met with our beverage manufacturers throughout this process, they kind of said it would be nice if we had a rewards program. It's difficult for us to do it individually, but if you could help us, that would be great. And that's where we launched Sips of Culpeper. We submitted this also to IEDC, and the feedback was phenomenal. The website's beautiful. You see the second one, what a unique project. I've never seen anything like this. I'm sure support from the farmers for this was a challenge, and it's impressive what you've accomplished. And I like this last one. Even though they were first skeptical of the project, which I think is a good way to describe. With that, IEDC announced that we won a gold award for this. So really thank the board's support for everything that we've done and changed in the last 3 years. Give you kind of a background of IEDC. There's 26 categories with population breakdowns for each category. There were 238 awards given out, 87 bronze, 87 silver awards, and 64 gold. 146 unique organizations honored. The best part is, though, all this information is public, where other economic developers, or like us, go through the awards and try to see what other good ideas we can bring into our community. The coolest one is the Best in Show Award. It's the top project of the year. It's the highest accolade that you can get in these annual awards. IEDC has those quotes that these aren't just any projects. We're talking about transformative and creative economic development initiatives. And then to the nominees, they say, you're shaping the future of your communities, and that's something to be very proud of. We love reading those applications. Because of that, later this month, we'll be going to Denver. We are up for Best in Show for Choose Culpeper Farms. So thank you guys so much. There's only 14. That's across all populations, all categories. And we feel pretty strong about what we've done.
Well, that's awesome, Brian, and I tell you, really appreciate the effort you and Winona have put into this on preserving our farmland and highlighting our smaller farms. I do have one question. I know at the last CDAC meeting, we had talked about a farmland exchange type program.
Correct.
Where you can go. Is that getting any traction?
We're still working with the developer on getting that fine-tuned, how that the developer had to come up with something new for us on that, so we're still working our way through that. Once we have that complete, we will be a further rollout.
Well, again, thank you all both for what you've been doing, and I know our farming community really appreciates it. So, any other questions or comments for Brian?
No, Brian, thank you for entertaining and making some of my oddest requests come to life in this, and you guys well deserve the awards that were given.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, next is our administrator's report. John, if you want to.
So, Mr. Chairman, just one thing this morning I wanted to seek some feedback on. I think most of you are aware that as we approach the next General Assembly session, we usually do a lot of keeping up with bills and watching out for what we're interested in and lobbying our legislators to some degree. And to that end, in the past, we have had our legislators invited to Culpeper so that you would have a chance to talk to them, ask them questions. More recently, we did that in conjunction with the school board as kind of a luncheon. And that kind of petered out last year largely because by the time we held it, the legislators had a hard time attending. We also had 5 legislators to round up, et cetera, et cetera. So Dr. Brads and I were just thinking that we might try to resurrect that this year if the board was interested. We just have 3 legislators to round up, and we'd probably try to do it in October, which would give us a better chance of better attendance. And I think we're kind of leaning towards maybe a breakfast. A lot of times the legislators are more able to do something in the morning and not have it eat up the middle of their day. So my question for you is, would you like Dr. Brads and I to organize another joint school and supervisor legislative, I think, breakfast this year?
To me, I mean, when I've talked to some of our legislators, a lot of the legislation is drafted in August and early September. So the legislation, I think if we got in front of the drafting, it may be more beneficial because the ability to influence is usually pre-draft.
I agree. I think we still should have one in October this year, but look forward to planning one more in the August timeframe for next year, because it never hurts to get in front of them and discuss with them what they have drafted, and negotiations still take place throughout the whole process. So I think this is still beneficial, but I agree that we should plan for earlier the following year.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, I'm going to take that as a we'll move forward, and maybe we'll have it as soon as reasonably possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 9.0 is our closed session.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we enter into closed meeting as permitted under Virginia Code annotated sections 2.2-3711A, 3, 6, 7, 8, and 29 to discuss and consider, 1, the potential purchase of real property located in the West Fairfax District, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position, negotiating strategy, and financial interest of the county board. 2, the potential purchase of real property located in the Stevensburg District, where the discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position, negotiating strategy, and financial interest of the board/county. 3, the potential purchase of real property located in the Catalpa District, where the discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position, negotiating strategy, and financial interest of the board/county. 4, the consultation with legal counsel, discussion and consideration of the potential award of a public contract involving the expenditure and/or the investment of public funds. And 5, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters, in particular pending lawsuits.
Motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're in closed session. Thank you all.